It's refreshment time, folks.
I have to return some videotapes.
Are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Do you like scary movies, Sydney?
You have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. Don't need a TV.
Books, records, films, these things matter. Call me shallow. It's the fucking truth.
Over 1,600 titles, each for rent at just $2 the first night, and only... Finish it.
I don't watch TV.
Yeah, but you are aware that there's an invention called television, and on this invention they show shows, right?
Tonight on 6 Ed World.
Okay, I want channels 18, 24, 63, 109, 87, and the Weather Channel.
Welcome to the Frog Brothers podcast with your hosts, Justin and Alec.
Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Frog Brothers podcast. I'm your host, Justin, and I'm here with the incredible, edible, well, I don't know about edible, but Alec, not to be confused with Apple.
The incredible edible. I mean, you could eat me. Hey, please pass the Alec.
If you were a hot dog, would you eat yourself?
If you were yogurt, would you be fruited at the bottom or stirred? A little Biodome throwback for you.
All right. So this week, we got some excellent stuff coming towards you. But I think what's on everyone's mind, really, is these quarantine updates that are keeping us all locked inside. But there's some cool stuff out there. So why don't you tell me what you found at the store, Alec?
Well, at the store, I was able to just find one of the new Ghostbusters PKE meters. I was quite satisfied with it. I was disappointed that there was nothing else Ghostbusters related other than the new Monopoly. But I also did manage to pick up some of those Scooby-Doo figures you were telling me about last week, because they're all on clearance at Walmart right now. And they're the 50th anniversary, so I got a couple of those, and then I picked up the Mystery Machine as well in store.
That's pretty awesome. I know all this new Scoob merchandise is coming out, so a lot of the old stuff went on clearance to make room for that on the shelf.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, was a lucky individual, and I found the Kenner re-release of the Classic 4 Real Ghostbusters. I didn't find the Green Ghost or Stay Puft yet, so still looking for those, but just kind of waiting and not going out of my way for anything. You know, if I'm at the store, I'll take a peek, but
yeah,
trying to be conscientious of what we're doing out there. Now, one thing you did find that you didn't take any pictures of, you bastard, was the new Top Gun toys, and that fucking intrigued me because Top Gun was one of my favorite movies as a child, so I sure as shit want to see those and see what they're all about, so
yeah,
that should be fun.
All I saw was like a 2-pack. It had 2 different fighter jets and pilots, and I think they fly through the air. I'm not 100% on that.
Well, if you see them again, take some pictures, because I haven't seen anything else for them, and I really have been too lazy to look on Instagram to see if anyone else has them right now.
They had some pretty cool alien figures as well. Like packs for $10 that come with a xenomorph and a very generic, like, space soldier or marine or whatever they're calling them. So
yeah, so I actually did see some of those when I was at the store, and yeah, those look kind of interesting. They had some like really obnoxiously bright colors, but for kids' toys, hey, whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if they had actual characters from the movies, I think I might have picked 1 or 2 up, but since they were just too generic, I was like, eh.
It almost felt like they'd go along with like an animated series from like the late 80s or early 90s, right? You know, like the bright popping colors and the package art and everything kind of seemed like a throwback for me, kind of cheesy.
Yeah. Not
quite as good as like a movie stuff would be, but, you know, kind of doing its own thing.
Yeah, I for sure enjoyed it.
So we both jumped on the Yes Have Some podcast eBay hang last night, and I indulged and picked up a few things. I got a Robert Muldoon Series 2 figure, and I got a Ian Malcolm with glider that I mentioned back on episode 1. I decided I need another one of those in my life, and made it happen. So what did you pick up?
I picked up a long sought-after item. for me. The Project Alf DVD. It's not a great movie, but
Hey,
any
Willie.
Alf collector needs to have it there.
Oh, Alf is one of the greatest series ever. It's really a shame that they haven't ever done anything else with that. And all that stuff should be on Blu-ray. Give me an HD version of all that. Give me the complete series and the movie, and I'll be set. And I want those damn holiday specials, too.
Yeah. The holiday specials are on the DVDs I have, so they're there. I also bought an Alf old, like, hanging cloth wall art. It's about 18 by 20.
Yeah, I saw that.
And he says,
Jealous of that. That thing looks pretty awesome.
They have, like, there were, like, 5 of them that were all just like that, and I picked the one where he's saying, I kill me, but there's ones where he's saying all, other catchphrases and shit.
I kill me is a classic Alf line there, so.
Yep.
So you've been working on any cosplay stuff? You got the new PKE meter. Are you going to upgrade that, make it look a little bit better?
I'm at least going to mod it with paint. I mean, just some wear and tear minimum. We'll see what happens, though. No plans further than that right now.
One thing you should check out, I've seen some people use some graphite on there to make it kind of look like it's more of a natural wear and tear feel to it. So check out some videos on using graphite to make it look more like a real item instead of just plastic.
For sure.
I really haven't done much of anything this week. I did get a new storage cart for a bunch of my arts and crafts stuff, so I kind of organized that. But basically, I'm waiting on GB Fans to ship a bunch of stuff that I've ordered over the past month and a half, and their store keeps getting delayed as far as being open since they're non-essential. And AJ's doing the right thing over there with his business and taking care of stuff. So just kind of waiting for that stuff to get shipped out, and then I can finish the Spirit Proton Pack upgrade, and I think that's going to look really awesome sitting next to my full-size pack.
Yeah. I did purchase a couple other things on eBay, but I will leave the reveal of those for when I open them. We're going to start doing kind of a mail day thing where we film all the stuff that we get, and we're going to put that stuff up on YouTube. So we will have a video up this week with maybe not some mail stuff, but it's some old classic stuff, going through some toys in the attic, seeing what we can find. So.
Oh, yeah. So Alec is currently staying at her mom's place, and all the moves we've had over the last, I don't know, since we were kids, it's a surprise you have boxes of toys still up in the attic, but he's going to go through and do some reveals to see what he's still got stored away up there, which is going to be pretty awesome. And then, yeah, we're going to start doing some mail opening videos. So if we buy anything from you and the packaging sucks or the shipping sucks, we're probably going to shame you for it. So if you're packing and selling to other collectors, make sure you send it nicely. No one likes to get something damaged in the mail.
So play nice.
So, anything else going on in your world right now?
Oh, not really. Just,
not really.
Existing, watching stuff. Pretty much just waiting.
What have you been watching?
I actually was watching Scooby-Doo the other day, the original series again. And then a lot of Curb Your Enthusiasm recently, too.
Excellent. So James Gunn's been doing some quarantine watch parties. So he did the original Guardians of the Galaxy recently, and then he did Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 on Thursday night. So that was pretty awesome. If you didn't watch, just jump on his Twitter feed and kind of read through it. There's a lot of insightful information on there. It's almost like the director's commentary, but through tweets, and there's quite a few of the cast members on there, which I really enjoyed that. So that's something I'd like to see people continue to do after the fact.
Yeah, I can see that.
But on that note, I think we're ready to jump into...
We now return to the real Ghostbusters.
Diane, 11:30 a.m., February 24th. Entering the town of Twin Peaks.
Pretty good. Bill Murray's the funniest man on the planet.
Episode by episode.
All right, so this week we're talking about Fear Itself, Episode 4 of Extreme Ghostbusters. This is actually one of my favorite episodes of the series. I really like it. It's one that I remember the most. One of them. Besides the first...
Seems like this...
Go ahead.
It seems like this one was always one that was on on repeat and replay, right? I do recall having seen this one quite a few times, so it really stands out in your mind, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of, it's a memorable one. It has some good stuff in it. It kind of opens up at a Vinny's, which is presumably a bar, because there's a bunch of bikers running out of it, and then some green lights, the police show up, and then there's like some floating knives, and they come out there and fling at the police and stuff. And this is the first cold open we have of Extreme Ghostbusters where it's not just showing a situation with a ghost and all this stuff, and then it fades to the theme song. This actually, all of a sudden, Garrett rolls up in his wheelchair and is like, hey, I'll fucking take care of this. I ain't afraid of no ghost. And then...
yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
He rolls down there, right? And then you're trying to figure out, well, where the hell's everybody else at?
Yeah.
And you find out the Ecto-1 is broken down, and Egon's telling him to be careful because they're like, hey,
hey, Garrett, be careful going down there by yourself.
Yeah.
So just dealing with that whole piece. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, those flying weapons, I took note of that. I'm like, all right, there's a bunch of flying knives coming out the door. Again, it's, you really pick up the tonal differences between this and RGB with stuff like that, right? You're not normally going to see a bunch of, there's probably some stuff like that, but just to see it again and like a bunch of knives flying out of there, and then
right, and you can tell
the ghost.
Go ahead.
Oh, the ghost in the bar is like that biker-looking ghost, which is pretty badass looking. I thought that was a pretty unique villain in there.
Yeah, he walks in there and he's like, it's gonna wish it never died. Which I thought was a funny line.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I mean, right? I mean, Garrett's got a lot of the cheesy kind of one-liners, and then Eduardo's got a lot of the idiot one-liners.
Yeah.
So between there's a lot of fun little like quips and plays in the vocal performances by the cast.
As with any show, there's episodes where it focuses on one character and their kind of arc for that episode, and the big one for this one is Garrett. So, he's obviously talking about fear. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. He says like references to that several times. He's like, I'm not afraid of anything. And
yep, and it starts off by like you see him get stuck in that phone booth.
Yeah.
At the beginning of that episode, right? So he's like, I'm not afraid of anything. And then gets trapped in a phone booth, and Mike's line like, except for this. So he's in this confined space, and then that's when you kind of cut out and go to the normal opening.
Yeah, and it comes back from the opening with what I can only describe as a weasel-looking motherfucker, or maybe an animated version of the what is it? The guy. He's not the host. What's the fancy word for a host at a restaurant? Like a maitre d'?
Yeah, maitre d'.
Like the maitre d' in Ferris Bueller. He has that vibe going on.
Yeah.
And they even fucking call him Mr. Swank is his name and shit.
Yeah, the other thing funny about that drawing is he does remind me of the hotel manager from Ghostbusters 1, the movie.
Yeah.
Just the way he looks with like that pencil-y mustache and that balding head.
I was about to say, yeah, actually,
there,
you saying that, he looks even more like that than what I was thinking, so...
Yeah, and then you saying his name is Mr. Swank, I wrote that down too. They're like, Mr. Swank. And then he says he's going to open up this swankiest nightclub in New York City. You're like, oh man, just like dump on that nacho cheese because it's thick.
Yeah. So he kind of has his
break open this door.
Yeah.
Construction worker breaks open the door and goes down into the basement. And that's kind of when you get the first view of what's going on down there, right? There's this... it looks like kind of a bug thing. It's just like a real quick shot of the ghost or the main villain. I wouldn't even say he's a ghost based off the end of the episode.
Yeah. Yeah, so he has a weird encounter, and he mentions that he's afraid of heights, not the dark. So he's going down there with a flashlight, and then the floor kind of drops out beneath him, and he's hanging there really high up, and he kind of freaks out, and then we go back to the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, they kind of go to that iconic look of when you see someone on like those old New York skyscrapers being built, like right, kind of like looks like he's up there on the iron bars and like is just scared to death up there. So
right,
don't they show him getting wheeled out in like an ambulance just because of his fear of heights and everything? And then they make a joke about him going down in the basement.
Yeah,
like he's downstairs.
Yeah, Eduardo's like he went down, not up, and he's like, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. That's why it's kind of weird, don't you think? So they head in... Slimer shows up almost immediately when they enter this place. And they're kind of like, what the fuck are you doing here? But he's just hanging out. And not much happens till they split up, really. And then they start encountering various different things. Clearly their fears, basically.
So one other quick thing, since you said Slimer there, I was thinking of, right? So they're down in the basement of the firehouse before all this. And they make a joke about Slimer eating everyone's lunches or something, and then Janine says, like, oh, you ate broccoli too. Right? And then Slimer looks like he's going to go vomit and flies out of the room.
Yeah.
And then they get a phone call, and Garrett answers, Extreme Ghostbusters, which is just kind of like one of those little notes because they don't refer to themselves as Extreme Ghostbusters.
Right.
In any of the other episodes yet that I'm aware of. So to me, like, that just makes it, like, in canon, like, this is basically the third iteration of the business. So did they reopen just with a new name for business liabilities or what, you know?
Right.
It's kind of one of those little thoughts. Doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but kind of always curious about those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, that's just almost the exact thing as how they're wearing the patch with the 2 in Ghostbusters 2. And, you know, I've heard people make the argument, well, it's like their comeback. And it's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm not really digging on it that hard. It is kind of weird, but it's like, whatever.
It's very tongue-in-cheek with the way that's presented. But again, at the same time, right, they could have had to open under a different business entity name based on all that. So who knows, right? So the other thing is, so Slimer also gets caught stealing that worker's lunch down in the basement there.
Oh, yeah.
So he steals this sandwich and eats it, and then the guy, like, opens his lunchbox and sees a bunch of slime in there and looks pissed off, which is pretty funny. And then as they're going downstairs, like, they kind of go into a room, and Slimer gets slammed by the door and then flies and, like, pulls himself out butt first and pops his head out of the wall, or the door. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. They go down there, and they end up all coming across their own kind of fears and stuff. I think the first one we come across is Kylie's, which is the maggots. Which is kind of like, I can relate because of that time. They weren't maggots, they're mealyworms or whatever. But you remember this. Grandma Jane's house, when I ate a bowl of shredded wheat.
You're eating maggots, Michael.
I was eating, exactly. I was eating frosted shredded wheat. And I was kind of just, it was early in the morning. We were cleaning out my grandma's house. She was moving into a care facility at the time. And so we were cleaning this place out. And she had this place since the 50s. So, needless to say, I was eating the cereal. And I was kind of looking down at it. And I was like, huh. Looks like my cereal's moving a little bit. I was like, and then I was like, no, I'm just fucking tired. Like, it was, I've never done that before. Like you see in movies where you see somebody do something, they do a double take. That's exactly what happened, though. I was like, looked down, and I was like, nah, I'm ignoring that. Then I was like, wait a second. I looked closer, and it's hard to see because the worms are the same color as the shredded wheat. And they are...
Oh, yeah, they're like that light
all
pale
crawling
color.
out of there.
I remember, because
this is also...
once you showed that, yeah.
This is also probably about at least 7 or 8 bites in.
Yeah, and then our grandfather's brother-in-law was there, and he made a joke. He's like, "It's just extra protein," and you're like, "Yeah, I don't know about eating a bunch of bugs out of there."
That's what anyone over the age of 40 would say. Maybe 50.
Yeah, that's and he just made a joke about, like, oh, those are in like all foods. It's like a matter of them, they're to heal long enough or to hatch after being in there for so long, and you're like. Yeah, either way, that's pretty nasty. So it was surprised you didn't yak everywhere because that was pretty gross. But it was totally a scene straight out of the Lost Boys when you're doing that, right? And the fact that you had one of those moments just goes to show that, like, stranger than fiction is such a true thing because you stopped what you're doing, like you look down at the bowl and you're like, huh. Probably had another bite, and then you're like, wait a second, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And then you look down and. You're living the life of Michael, and luckily it was only one type of food you tried that had bugs in it.
Right. I expected to look up and see
open up another bowl.
Kiefer Sutherland sitting there laughing, and I was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, if only I'd had a mullet at the time, it would have been perfect.
Oh, it would have. You need a sick mullet like that. Everyone needs a sick mullet like that, though.
No, so back to Kylie's fear of mullets. A little sidetrack there, which is beautiful.
Kylie's fear
like
of
when
mullets.
you see something like that. Yep. So she's got that fear, and then she like winds up kind of freaking out.
Yeah. And then we see, what is Eduardo's next? Or is it Roland's? I'm not sure, but Eduardo's, his...
Roland just kind of disappears. They really keep his stuff extremely vague in this episode, just because they're focused on so much of the other characters, which I didn't mind so much, right? He kind of disappears off. And yeah, then they go into Eduardo's, which basically, knowing you as your brother, as I have, it's like your ultimate fear as well.
Yeah, well, for sure, in my entire life, like when I was very young, I used to have panic attacks when I would think about death. Just knowing the fact that everyone died and that one day I was going to die, I would think about it constantly. And I've always had weird anxiety problems where my brain tries to calculate, like, shit while I'm trying to sleep at night. And actually, I'm not having these issues anymore, but I used to. I would sit there in bed at night and be like, all right, well, shit, I'm about to turn 29. Play my cards right, I've got maybe, at most 70 more years. Fuck that, that's not enough. And then I'm like, well, I've only been alive for 28 and it feels like a while. And then I start thinking about how time speeds up and all that shit. And that's how kind of my brain used to work and why I would get panic and anxiety about that shit. And now I just don't fucking worry about it. It's like Donnie Darko when he's like, I just don't think about it. It's absurd.
As crazy as that is, man, I remember being down at our grandma's house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm like being maybe 5 or 6. I was pretty young. And like somebody died on a show, and like then I asked a question about that, and they explained it, that everyone dies. And I remember like, oh, that's a mild existential crisis for a child to have. They're like, well, that's bullshit. I don't agree with that. Who the fuck signed me up for this? But
my story is almost identical to yours because I was watching Land Before Time at Grandma Krish's at the time, I believe, in Iowa. And I was watching it on the futon in the living room, and I remember asking Mom, like, just about the mom dying in that movie. And I was like, that's fucked up. You're not going to die, are you? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, fuck. What are you talking about? And she kind of explained it to me, and I was like, well, that sucks. But,
Yeah, so you totally understand Eduardo's thing there because...
Right.
Even he makes the joke, like, basically Garrett had been making fun of him, saying that, oh, you probably, you're probably scared of being naked in public.
Yeah, or mayonnaise.
And, like, they kind of joke about that. Yeah. And, then you see this zombie version of Eduardo that kind of was a throwback to Flipside episode of Real Ghostbusters where you have the People Busters. Just like some of the looks of them kind of had that zombie look.
Yeah.
The proportions and stuff weren't quite that exaggerated, but I did appreciate the nod and the artwork that kind of had that feel to it.
Yeah, I definitely like that part. I like the way it was animated and stuff. And then you get to Roland's, and his he said at some point earlier in the episode that his only fear was his equipment breaking down. So, he ends up, his equipment starts acting strange, doing some shit, so he throws this proton pack off his back, and then it starts moving and jiggling and expanding, and then animal, like, ghost parts start popping out of it, and it basically comes alive, turns itself into a monster, and starts fucking with him.
Yeah, chasing him around down there, which is pretty cool, right? Yeah. And then you get into the scene where Garrett really starts owning this episode again here after he sees that Eduardo's scared to death. You see there's the casket in there, right? And Eduardo gets stuck in the casket since he's claustrophobic.
Garrett does.
Or no, sorry, Garrett gets stuck in that casket because he's claustrophobic, right? And then, Eduardo's already out of the room with his zombie self. And then, Garrett's like, you know what? The only thing to fear is fear itself. And that's kind of where he starts saying that.
Yeah.
And then at that point, he's able to get out of the coffin, get back into his wheelchair, and get out of the room. And then he goes down a hallway that starts getting narrower and narrower. And, you can tell, like, they're showing the panic that he's experiencing because the walls get skinnier, the room gets smaller, and then the ceiling starts coming down on him.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, he says, you know, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Blasts out a brick and like busts through a wall and winds up in the same room with Kylie.
Yeah. The conclusion that they come to is that they can fight each other's fears. What Garrett kind of comes across and he says, you know, I ain't afraid no maggot.
Yeah, so Garrett's kind of championing the whole program here. He's saying, hey, you know, the only thing to fear is fear itself, but then realizing some of these guys aren't ready to conquer their fears, right?
Yeah.
And they said, well, you know, we can handle each other's fears, right? So everyone takes on one of the other ones. So one of the funniest one, I think, is that Slimer's still down there messing around, and he's trapped into a room all by himself with a plate full of broccoli and a stick of butter on it, and he's just like so grossed out and terrified of it.
Yeah.
And Roland comes in that room and simply puts the lid back on the dish of broccoli, and like that's how he rescues him.
Yeah. And
then with Kylie's, you know, she's afraid of this giant maggot that basically almost looks like one of the worms out of Tremors. Or a grub, or what are they called? Graboids.
Yeah, I was about to say, they're called graboids.
Yeah, so it kind of reminds me of the graboid with the size of it, and then Eduardo knocks it down and it like explodes and splatters everywhere, so totally getting Tremors vibes off of that. So I love it when you see some like crossovers from other classics that kind of like just appear in things like this.
Yeah, I definitely get Tremors vibes from that too, for sure.
Oh, Kylie gets a real big kick out of going and blasting the ghost of it, or the zombie Eduardo, you know, because he's always annoying the hell out of her, so she really gets a kick out of it, which is pretty funny, like another little good moment in the show.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I kind of just...
And then Garrett...
I really enjoyed the dynamic between Kylie and Eduardo in general. And I mean, they all kind of have their own chemistry with each other, because it's really funny to see Eduardo and Garrett together too.
Oh yeah, such opposites, right? You know, they all get along, but they have a little bit more personality that way. But
well, it's like, yeah, I think he's
Garrett
already calling him Eddie at this point. You know, he's like, he sees him as his friend, but he also gives him a ton of shit, just like you do your friends.
Well, yeah, the only way you can really give people shit is if you truly like them, right?
Yeah.
There's times where like I'll be fucking with people at work or whatever, and you're like, you know, if I didn't like you, I wouldn't even bother wasting my time messing with you.
Right.
So that's not everyone gets that style of humor anymore, but it's that's how if I'm fucking with you or making fun of you, just know that that's usually a sign that I like you. Once we're on that level.
Yeah.
So Garrett does a good job. He rolls over with his wheelchair and smashes that proton pack ghost that Roland was so afraid of. And basically they all team up and help each other out with their fears, and then they go tracking down the little ghost. I don't know if we ever got a name for him or not, but...
I think they just call it fear. He said that's fear
probably.
itself. It's scared of us.
Yeah, and like you see this animal or, you know, little ghost quivering on its own, and that's basically it. You know, they just kind of leave it be, and it doesn't turn into a big thing.
Yeah. I like that.
So I thought that was good. Yeah, I was happy with that, right? You know, like it's been down here and isolated by itself for so long. So, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Definitely wasn't disappointed with that. And it's, you know, I like seeing how the team has to improvise and overcome things without just catching ghosts, right?
Right.
I mean, who doesn't love that part of Ghostbusters, right? Obviously, that's a huge piece of it, but seeing them come up with that, and then again, this one's kind of got that moral of the story. It's like, yeah, you need to conquer your fears, but if you got a good group of people around you, a good support system, you can conquer those fears with a team, or rely on your friends to conquer your fears, right? So they all worked together and eventually got through it.
Yep.
You know, and that just rings through in life so much, you know. You know, it's easier to get through those tough days or tough moments when you have good people to get through them with, and, you know, give you that alternate perspective that, hey, things may seem extremely drastic to you, but I see them a different way, and, you know, I can help you get to the other side of this bridge or whatever that looks like. So, pretty cool. I enjoy some of the little moral of the stories of these.
Yep. It was a good episode. Like I said, one of my favorites. One of the most rewatchable, one I've seen the most. That might be why it's one of my favorites, because one of the ones that I remember a lot, so.
Absolutely. So we're going to move on to the next segment. 5 minutes, Alec and Justin discuss their art history, and their art futures. All right, Alec, I got a 5-minute timer starting now. So here we go. So tell me about your art. What got you into art, and what types of art are your favorite to do?
As most things in life, I was the youngest of 4 kids, so a lot of my interests fucking came from whoever I was hanging out with, and most of it was you, because you were the other, boy. So I was hanging out with you a lot, and a lot of my interests came from that. So that's kind of where painting and drawing and all that stuff started, I think, was, again, just copying shit you were doing. But eventually I started just doing stuff like trying to draw cartoon characters from Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball, and then eventually Family Guy and all that kind of stuff, and kind of got into that more style of art. Started painting a lot in high school, just at home, buying canvases and exploring that. I was using oils for a while, and then I switched to acrylics. Much prefer acrylics. Do some watercolors and stuff like that. But one of the coolest things I did was wrapped 2 canvases in some phone book pages, and just made a little tiny series with Dracula on one and Frankenstein on the other in watercolor.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I think I remember seeing those. Do you still have those somewhere?
Yeah, they're hanging on my walls right now, actually.
Excellent. So I guess I'll jump in and talk a little bit about mine. So as a kid, it was like always drawing and painting and stuff. And then in junior high, taking all the art classes, and we had some pretty awesome art teachers there. And so they exposed me to a lot of different things there. So, whether that was clay, pastels, colored pencils, watercoloring, acrylics, painting, like a little bit of everything. So really explored there a lot. Kind of got out of art for a little while in high school. Like I took art classes in junior high, but in high school I did some graphic design stuff my senior year. So in that graphic design class, it kind of did everything I wanted, since I was also working on being in a band, and everything you need in a band was like running your own business, right? You're doing art, you're doing advertising, everything. So
right.
I remember I'd design and print like tape inserts for tapes we'd recorded at a band practice and things like that, like little demo tapes.
Yeah.
And also learned how to do some screen printing there, so, and some heat press shirt making. So for my first band, I used to screen print all of our own shirts there, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then, I'd kind of dabbled in painting a little bit off and on, always have, really, mostly acrylics. And then from being in a band as well, I always branded my guitar hard cases and stuff. So I did a lot of stenciling there and started doing stencils with X-Acto knives and things like that. So taking that concept of screen printing and then applying it to stenciling too. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I still really enjoy that. There's a lot of good things you can do there. I've even painted a guitar, stripped all the electronics off, took it down, took everything out of it, repainted it, put it all back together.
Yeah, we did that around the same time, actually, in 2011, I want to say, at one point. I did that with a guitar as well.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yeah, that was when you were my neighbor there, yep.
I did all my own album artwork for my band, Another Green World, which, not to shamelessly plug myself, but if you feel like listening to some 80s new wave-ish, synthwave, shoegaze, whatever you want to call it, it's pretty broad stuff. Another Green World's my band, but I did all the artwork for it. Usually it was photographs I took, and then I would do graphic design with them too and stuff.
Yeah, see, if it's an expensive hobby and one you can do, sign me up. I've done it, because I also went to community college for a little while doing some graphic design classes there. So obviously did some photography stuff there. I had a black and white dark room at home to do film prints and enlargements and all that stuff at home for a little while, which is pretty cool. So I had that background there, then all the other graphic design stuff we did, and then I did digital imaging for artists, which is more about combining multiple mediums and making it digital, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I ran a cassette label for a short minute, maybe 5 years ago, and I did all the printing, reproduction of the tapes and all that stuff, and did all the graphic design for them, printing, all that kind of stuff, assembly. So that was fun. I always like doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so that's a natural progression for me. You know, I've had some Ghostbusters cosplays over the year that progressively got better and better and more detailed.
And more recently,
and that's really...
You did the logo for this podcast. And you do all our artwork.
Yep, and well, you do artwork as well, and you've done all the themes, right? So if it's a creative outlet, we pretty much pursue it, or if it dabbled in it. So
yep,
you may see some like crazy stuff come from us just because it's. That's the timer, kids. So if you want to carry on this conversation, hit us up on social media. Tell us about what kind of art platforms you're into and what you enjoy about doing art and what your favorite mediums are.
With that being said, we're going to move on to our next segment.
Another man's garbage is another man's cold. Leave all the nostalgia horse, just wait till you get old. Another man's garbage is another man's treasure. I know that you will hate it, and that fact gives me pleasure. Another man's garbage.
All right, another man's garbage. This week we've got a classic film from the 2000s. It has a 16% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Pretty fucking low. Here's the opposite of that, though. The viewer score is 85%, which is one of the widest gaps I've seen on there. I think it qualifies as a cult film because of this. We're talking about Grandma's Boy this week. I don't know how many of you have or haven't seen it. It's a classic movie. You got any opening thoughts for it?
Pretty amazing. Opening thoughts for it. So Grandma's Boy, right? I was late to the party on this one, so I hadn't seen this until, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years after it was out. I think our friend Edgar showed us this movie, or he showed it to me because he was always fucking quoting it at me, and I didn't know what he was quoting. And so for someone that like has movie quotes as a second language,
yeah,
kind of pissed me off. I didn't know. So he'd always be like, "Sucks to be you, nerd."
Yep.
And he's always quoting the biker at the party at the end. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, that's from Grandma's Boy. And so then, obviously, we remedied that situation. And it came out in 2006, so maybe it would have been 2009 probably when I saw it. So a couple of years late to the party, but Edgar showed me that movie originally, which is pretty awesome. So after that, you know, anytime I see that one on TV, I have to watch it just because it's so absurd, but it's so fun.
Yeah, it's basically... I mean... I should have done a little bit more research on this, at least in terms of the cast, because I can't even tell you the guy's name, who's the lead. But everyone knows him because he's in basically every Adam Sandler movie from the 90s and 2000s, which so are all the other group. Kind of Adam Sandler's group is what this movie consists of without Adam Sandler.
Yeah, so this is probably his most well-known movie that he's not in, and probably most successful movie that he's not in, because I think it did well at the box office. The critics just didn't understand it, which, go figure, you know, someone that tries to study high art film doesn't always get what people like.
Yeah. So it's, so as a stoner myself, this movie is one of those movies I watch on 420. If I watch a big barge of like Cheech and Chong movies, Pineapple Express, that kind of stuff. This is just a fun movie to watch. So you start out the movie in there, and it's the two guys playing, I think it's a boxing game on Xbox. Smoking out from a bong, you know. Just doing what everyone's doing in the quarantine, basically. Getting high and playing video games or whatever. So, he spills the bong. Two guys walk into their house, like two like thug-looking guys, like they got... they're big, tall, muscular.
Like thugs. Yeah, they just look like moving guys, like hired moving guys.
Yeah, that's an even better description. So they go in there and they just kind of like start eating shit out of the kitchen. And then he's like, what the hell are you guys doing in here? And then, their landlord comes in, and it's Rob Schneider. And he's doing another one of his weird accents. And he's kind of like, his race is kind of, you're like, I don't fucking know what this guy's supposed to be. But I'm pretty sure...
It's Rob Schneider just being a fucking weirdo. And
yeah, but
sometimes you love him, sometimes you hate him.
I've seen him accused of being racist a lot in his portrayals. But then somebody else told me, or I don't remember where I heard this, but that he's very mixed race anyway. Like, he has actually a lot of different stuff in him or something. Not an expert on the subject, I'm just saying. It is Rob Schneider. You know, you love him or you hate him, or you just kind of feel like, eh. For me, the best thing he ever did was 50 First Dates. And when he's saying, he's talking about the sharks, and he's making the shark documentary, and he's like, sharks, they only bite when you try to touch their private parts.
That's funny. Hey, so since we're also big Ghostbusters nerds, controversial statement here, regardless of how you feel about Answer the Call. So Rob Schneider's daughter is a musician, and she is on the soundtrack for Answer the Call. The more you know.
So yeah, it turns out that his roommate has been spending the rent money he gives him on Filipino hookers. And at one point he's like, he calls one of the other guys a hooker while he's crying on the floor. He's freaking out. He's like, "You're a hooker." And he goes out there.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. Like, he was over the top acting, right? Because the main actor, I forget his name, but yeah, he's kind of playing it straight-laced, right? He's kind of balances out a lot of the side background characters, because he's just he's relatable, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see meeting somebody like that or knowing somebody like that, which makes it enjoyable because, you know, everyone's got like a circus around them sometimes in life, right? And just to see it all amped up for a stoner movie is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Like one of the funniest scenes in that movie is like where he's in the bathroom, J.O., and jerking off, and has looking at the little doll.
Oh yeah,
and then
we'll get there in just a second. I got the quote for that for you.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, basically, they get kicked out of their house, which sets off the plot of the movie. You know, he doesn't have a place to stay. That's kind of like the whole thing. So, he goes to his drug dealer Dante's house. And this is where it reminded me of some more pop culture, because he's, they're smoking weed in his basement. And it's another one of those guys that is always in the Adam Sandler movies. I can't remember his name. Follow him on Instagram, though. He goes by El Presidente because of this movie. Because Dante's like his, I don't know, must be one of his favorite roles he's played. And so he's talking about how he's going to get a lion, right? And the other guy's like, what do you need a lion for? And I'm immediately just thinking, this is like fucking Tiger King.
Oh, I was definitely thinking about that too. Tiger King came up when he's like, oh, the lion in there. And you're like, he's like, yeah, man, the lion's for like protection, man.
Yeah.
He kind of has that word stoner sound to him. So he's like, yeah, man, he's like, why don't you just get a dog? Man, because no one will mess with the lion, man. And I'm just like thinking Tiger King, and you're like, oh yeah, this is just proof that there's real people like there in the real world. Again, it all goes back to Stranger Than Fiction.
Yeah.
Somebody knows some asshole with a lion, and they're like, holy shit, that needs to be in a movie.
So then he goes out, and he's staying with his friend, and it's played by Nick Swardson, and I only know his name. He's like the only person's name I know, but I don't even really like him that much. But this is one of the movies where I love him. You know, he's in a lot of terrible shit, but he's in a lot of good shit like this too. But he's basically a man-child, and a very exaggerated man-child. He sleeps in his race car bed, and he's like, yeah, but it's a fucking sweet car, or whatever, race car. But that's the part you were talking about, where he's like bored and he can't sleep, and he decides he's looking around on the shelves in his room, you know, the other guy's room. I called him a kid because he's basically a fucking kid, and he's like, ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
And he like takes this doll into the bathroom. Next thing you know, the framing of the shot is perfect, because it's like the next shot is like the camera's sitting almost on the toilet, and he's jerking off over the toilet. And he's like, oh yeah, my cock is lost in the jungle, and it's up to you to find it.
Nice. I like how you got the exact quotes on that one. I wasn't paying that close of attention.
Yeah, some of them you just have to. And then he turns her over and he's like, yeah, you're a dirty girl, you want it, or whatever. He's saying some shit like that. And then the door opens behind him.
He looks up her dress.
Yeah. Door opens behind him, and the guy's mother walks in. And he turns around, and he's moving around frantically, and he's still jerking off. And he's like, oh, I'm coming. Oh, I can't stop. It feels so good. And then it just cuts to them, like, standing outside, the two guys.
Yeah, that's pretty funny out there, because they're in the parking lot, or they're outside the house and talking. He's like, I can't believe you came on my mom.
Right.
Which is just absurd, right? There's some certain things you should never hear in life. And that rate's right near the top.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, my mom said you could still stay the night. He's like, oh, because that's going to be an awkward breakfast. So he's like, I think I'm going to go into work.
Right. Yeah, at some point he calls somebody else Douche Bigelow. And I was like, well, that's fucking meta, because Rob Schneider's in this movie. And also, that's a terrible movie. And I don't mean Another Man's Garbage. I mean, that's a terrible movie. I don't like that movie.
Yeah, that one's hard to watch. I saw that once, and you're like,
I liked it when I was a kid. How fucked up is that? Like an 11, 12-year-old watching that, liking it. That's fucked up.
It's probably because you wanted to be a male prostitute back then. That's fine.
Goals. So yeah, they go into work, and then you're introduced to JP. And one of the early lines he says that cracks me up is when he's like, yeah, I'm thinking about getting metal legs. He's just like this uber nerd, He's obviously the antagonist of the movie.
Yeah, but he's the nerd in the bad way, right? Because like they portray him as super nerdy, but like with no social skills, but he's also just a dickhead, right? So like it's one thing to be nerdy, but like, he's at that next level. They kind of portray him as like having that next level borderline genius, so like the social skills just are not there, and he always talks like a robot. It always cracks him up. He's like, I am a robot.
Yeah.
Kind of like wiggles around and like walks funny out of there. It's like,
I hate your face.
If someone grew up and The Matrix was The Matrix was the movie they loved the most, like that's essentially like what this character is, like someone that grew up loving The Matrix and like can't control themselves.
Yeah. He's wearing around a black fucking leather trench coat the whole time. And this is one of those movies that, to me, it has that, like, classic formula. Like, if you moved this movie, like, if you had made this movie, it feels like it could have been made in the early 80s, minus the technology and obvious shit like that. Like, written-wise and plot, because it has that classic feel that classic 80s comedies have. Like, it definitely feels like it would have fit in with the National Lampoon stuff and Caddyshack and stuff like that.
Oh, definitely. It's definitely a throwback there with that. And then even the plots of this movie would have worked very well back then, right? You could have made this in the 80s, 90s, or even currently now, right?
Yeah.
Just with the video game stuff, it'd be easy to adapt the basic concept of the script to a lot of the things, so.
Yeah, so
eventually he moves in with Grandma, right? After he messes up living with his friend, trying to figure things out, and can't really get caught sleeping at work because there's this big deadline for this video game, so kind of winds up going over there, and it's just kind of like Golden Girls-esque, where he goes in and moves in with Grandma, and she's got some friends living in there too, and hilarity ensues.
Yeah, so one of the first things that happens the night he's there is, she's like, oh, here, you can sleep in here. This is where Sophie slept. And he's like, she didn't die in here, did she? Like, talking about the bed, and she's like, no. And then she's like, points to the floor, she fell out of bed and died right here. And then...
Oh, yeah, because that's great, because she comes back and scares the shit out of him later.
Yeah, she comes back there later, and you cut to him laying in the bed, and he can't sleep, and he's kind of just like... And he hears, like... so cold on the floor. Why didn't you help me? And then it was like, it's so cold when you're dead. And then she pops up and scares the shit out of him. And it's just like, oh yeah, we're gonna have fun here. And you're kind of like, all right, this is gonna be pretty fucked up.
No, the beautiful thing about that though is it's just like such a silly movie, and it's so funny because of all those little things in there. Because that's also the mom from Christmas Vacation. She's the grandma.
Yeah.
And she's also on what's that TV show called? Everybody Loves Raymond.
Oh yeah, Everybody Loves Raymond.
Which, don't get me started on that. That's kind of like, fucking hate that show.
So do I. But what are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, Deborah?
Is that what his wife's name is? Deborah or something? I don't know. Yeah, but So then he's, wakes up the next morning and it's the fucking grandfather clock is going off in his room and he's just like pounding on it like, what the fuck are you doing? Stop! And his grandma comes and gets him breakfast and then happens to do a bunch of chores, and there's kind of like a montage where he's doing a bunch of chores and he's like smoking weed while he's doing them and shit. And then he goes to his drug dealer's house again, and then there's a fucking witch doctor sitting there and they're smoking weed and doing weird shit. I don't exactly remember why he was there at that point. No, actually I do. He's there picking up the bong and shit because the landlord broke his bong. So he gives him a bong and he gets some weed and weed supplies and shit like that. So he does that. And then this is when one of my favorite sequences happens. Remember when he's stoned as hell and he goes into the fridge. And he's like, oh, I fucking love having roommates who buy food. And he's like taking out fried chicken and leftover spaghetti. And then he's like, I don't even know what you are, but I'm going to fucking eat you. And then he's like creeping around the kitchen, holding all that food, looking around. And he's like, of course she doesn't have a microwave. She's a fucking 100. And he turns on the oven, heats it up, puts his food in, goes upstairs to smoke weed, puts his weed away, comes downstairs, and does a very stoner thing and just opens the oven up and grabs the fucking tray he's put all the food on, pulls it out, and then it burns him, and he immediately tosses all the food everywhere above him.
Yep, and then he can't program or test the games and stuff too, so which kind of comes into another layer of
exactly
stuff there. So the other like subplot that's going on in the movie that kind of winds up coming down towards the end of it is that he's been coding his own game, right? And shows it to his grandma, and she's playing it and like loves the game. And that game just looks like almost like the back of a Predator, like with the way the characters are.
Right.
Kind of is what it reminded me of. I was like, oh, a Predator game, that's pretty badass.
Pretty much.
And then JP, or whatever his name, steals that game and takes credit for it.
Yeah, that's kind of like the main little conflict at the end.
Yeah, kind of when you get to that resolution.
I had a couple more interesting moments in here, like when he walks out of the office and JP's standing against the wall, and he's got the coat covering up like his head and shit. And he's like, JP, what are you doing? And he's like, he's weirded out. And that's where he's like, whatever, man. And he walks away and he's like, I hate your face. And he walks back over to him, gets really close to him. He's like, what was that? And he just says like, nothing. And he's like, you're fucking weird. And he walks away. And he's like, how can he see me? Because he thinks he's blending into the fucking black wall because of his coat. And then, the Dance Dance Revolution scene. You know, remember that part where they're playing the game? That's Nick Swartzen playing it with one of the guys, and he's like, yeah, take your Woody Allen jacket off, is one of the little bits there he says. But then he says, after he beats his ass in the game, he's like, new high score. Is that bad? What does that mean? Did I break it?
Yeah, just some over-the-top shit in there, right? And then, was it Kevin Nealon plays their manager that's like a real fucking hippie that's into like plant grass or whatever you call that, lemongrass or whatever, and like smoothies and shit, and big into yoga, which is funny because like that stuff's really popular now, but then at the time that was just like California lifestyle shit. So
yeah, he very much feels like that advanced version of his character from Happy Gilmore, even, where he's like, send him home, good vibes, good energy.
Yeah, what I was thinking is like he starts carrying that weirdo vibe, and like you just kind of see how he evolves from this character to the character he played in Weeds. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. And one of the last quote I have on here written down is, "This woman's pussy smelled like the Great Depression."
That's terrible. Oh, yeah. Don't forget Nick Swartzen's character hooks up with a grandma in this too.
Oh, that's what that line is in reference to.
Oh, nice. Okay, there.
So she's like, "Yeah, I gave Charlie Chaplin a hand job."
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but
this movie's just kind of one of those that's just so over the top. You know, you can watch it; it's pretty funny. For me, it's not insanely quotable. I've never watched it to that level, but ever since Edgar was being an asshole and says, "Sucks to be you, nerd," I say that a lot now too, just because And I don't even quote how the character in the movie says it. I just quote and impersonate how Edgar says it, so it's pretty funny.
Yeah. Yep, it's a good movie. Hit us up, let us know, what you guys think of this movie, if you've seen it or what you thought, if you liked it, if you hated it. Let us know.
Top 5, 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 top 5.
This is Top 5.
What are your top 5 Marvel Cinematic Universe films, Alec?
Well, they are this, and this. No, this was actually a pretty hard one for me. There's only, 22 Marvel movies released right now. MCU Marvel movies.
Only 22.
Yeah, only. But narrowing down to 5, you'd think would be easier than things like, movie soundtracks, where you're like, all right, well, there's infinite movies. But I had a hard time with this. So I'm going to start with my number 5. And that's going to be one of the most recent ones of the recent phase. I really like it. I think everyone really likes it. It was financially one of the most successful Marvel movies. I'm talking about Black Panther. Black Panther, for me, is just a fucking dope movie. It's one of the best standalone Marvel movies as well. You can just watch that one anytime. You don't feel like you have to start watching them in order and shit to be able to just sit down and watch Black Panther. Which, I've seen all the Marvel movies enough that I can just watch any of them at any point anyway. But sometimes it gives me the urge to start watching other ones. And Black Panther will do that, but not in the sense of I feel incomplete. So, I really like Black Panther. Black Panther's my number 5. What do you got for 5?
Number 5, Ant-Man came in at number 5 for me. I really like how after some of these movies got so big, Ant-Man was kind of like a small, self-contained movie. It was really fun. There's a lot more humor in it. Like, Paul Rudd's awesome in it, and then you just really get a good support cast in there, too. So, like, that one was really funny. It's probably one of the funnier ones. Like, just overall, the way it's written and everything.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, just for me as a parent, like, it really clicks, like, with having that relationship with your kid there, that some of the stuff you don't get in some of the other Marvel movies, like, right, you really care for these characters, like, on a deep personal level, not just like a overarching story level, right? And you eventually get some of that from other ones, but I don't know, to me, like, that was just a relatable one. Kind of an everyday Joe gets kind of thrown into this thing, and I just love the way it was done. I loved the scale of everything, seeing everything small and seeing some of the toys and everything miniaturized. It was so cool just seeing how all that worked. So,
yep.
Ant-Man was number 5.
For number 4, I also had Ant-Man. Here's his 5 minus 4. I'll briefly just talk about a couple things I liked about it. One of the things that sticks out of my head randomly, think about it now, is that little fight when they're in the briefcase and it's falling or whatever. And, they're playing The Cure, and it's a song called Plain Song. It's the first song on their album Disintegration, and I always was like, wow, that's really fucking cool. And then in Ant-Man 2, they referenced how, he's like, yeah, my aunt or my mom, he says, or something, is always playing Morrissey. She always listens to Morrissey. So that's pretty funny, because they mention The Cure in the first one, the Smiths in the second one. What do you got for number 4?
Number 4, I have the first Avengers film.
Interesting.
So for me, I think there's a lot of really awesome things about that movie, right? When you finally get to that first Avengers movie, like the phase 1 it's not quite as grand in scope, and so like this was the first one that really showed us like how you can add all these characters up and like make something amazing, right? You have all these major heroes coming in there, but then you also get introduced to, like Hawkeye, and then you just start seeing other characters show up that aren't really quite there before.
Well,
you got Coulson in there too, and I think he does a really awesome job in there. So
I had forgotten, but Hawkeye was introduced in Thor.
Yeah, very briefly, right? It's like a cameo.
Yeah, kind of how they put.
You don't really get much.
Yeah, Black Widow was in Iron Man 2, I think, before. So.
Yeah, just like barely any dialogue, just like, hey, here they are. And it's more like an acknowledgement than anything else. But what's your number 3?
Well, that's where I was going with this, because my number 3 is Avengers. Pretty much all the reasons you mentioned. It's perfect. It's just really good. It's one of the most rewatchable ones for me because it's still fun seeing Iron Man and Captain America really meet Thor. And I mean, Bruce Banner, they all really just meet in that movie. All that stuff, the helicarriers, the Shield, Nick Fury, you know, like you said, Coulson. They even have like fucking Maria Hill in there, and then yeah, that movie just I hadn't even seen Thor when I saw that one, but it made me want to, you know what I mean? So I think it was just great.
Yeah, actually, to be honest with you, I don't think I had seen Thor myself before I saw that, and then you go back and you watch it, and then you realize like these really do all connect and combine in ways that, like, we never really experienced before. So it was definitely kind of one of those things I think from the original Avengers on, I didn't skip anything in theaters, you know, or I didn't skip viewing anything before I saw something else. Let's put it that way.
Avengers, like we said, well, we'll move on to your number 3 in a second, but Avengers it was the first movie where it brought all those people together and proved that it could be done and done well and not suck and be really fucking awesome, actually. So, what do you got for 3?
Yep. Number 3 for me was Black Panther.
Nice.
So I love that movie. I love the dialogue you have there. There's some amazing dialogue just with how some of the characters are, right? Like Michael B. Jordan has some crazy, well-written dialogue, and his performance is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I remember reading in an interview that he had his uniform at one point is inspired by Vegeta's from Dragon Ball Z, and I always thought that was cool.
Yeah, and so he talks a lot of, like, there's a lot of truths in there that you're not expecting from, like, a Marvel movie, right? Everyone's like, oh, this is just a Marvel movie. Well, they talk about slaves, like, jumping off a ship and drowning instead of going into slavery, right? So it's pretty crazy to, like, consider all that, and, like, they're able to rope that in there, and, like, you really feel for those characters. Like, for me, he was one of the first villains, Killmonger, that you're almost rooting for him for some of it, right? He's misguided enough that he's definitely has potential to be an amazing anti-hero if you wanted him to be around still.
Yeah.
And then you just get to see Wakanda and, like, the way they made all that look so beautiful. And then the other thing I will say, when we were talking soundtrack or scores the other day, the score to this is really well done. Yeah. Like, it really feels like you're transported to a place with the score in this movie. Like, everything I like about the movie. And then, it's definitely one of my favorites.
Yep. All right, I'm going to go to my number 2, which is going to be Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man's always been one of my favorite heroes, comic book characters. So I didn't know how to feel when they were introducing Spider-Man. And he obviously had a moment in the third Captain America movie. But Spider-Man Homecoming was like, wow. There's things about this that I was, even while watching it, that I was like, okay, I don't really like that, but anything that I felt that way was so easy to ignore because the movie just kept captivating me and interesting me. And not just, there's just so much about it, you know, Michael Keaton and Tom Holland fucking own that movie. And then you have people like Ned. Ned's fucking hilarious. Tony Stark, you know, making an appearance in there, being in there, influencing him, all that stuff's really just awesome. That whole movie's great.
Yeah, now see, I didn't quite get that onto my list. It's like very close to being on there, but Spider-Man was my first comic book I ever read as a kid.
Yeah.
I had an issue, I remember buying comic book with Spider-Man and Electro in it, just randomly getting that at a Walmart one time when I was with Mom at the store. So Spider-Man was like my first introduction to heroes, and still love Spider-Man. And in the 90s, man, I was a Spider-Man nut. So, like,
yeah,
with the animated series and then the comic books then. But that movie's really well done. You know, like, Michael Keaton is an amazing villain in there. He's got so many layers of dynamics, right?
Yep.
And he's another one of those villains where you're like, oh, man, he's kind of you almost feel for him, right? Because he's just trying to take care of his family.
Yep.
And he's going about it the wrong way. And then even at the end, like, when he has the opportunity to say, you know, if I know who he was, I'd kill him, right? That just shows a layer of a villain there that almost on par with Loki. That I hope to see him more in some other movies. Just the way he was able to deliver that performance.
For sure, I definitely.
And then they did things that hadn't been done in other Spider-Man movies, right? I love how Spider-Man's out in the suburbs, away from the big city, so he can't just swing around town, right? And it shows like how absurd Spider-Man is when he's not there. And then they've also got those Ferris Bueller vibes with him.
Oh yeah,
going through in the backyards and stuff. So like, there's definitely some fun nods in there. So I do enjoy that one quite a bit. But my number 2 was Infinity War.
I can see that.
My biggest thing there is,
that was the culmination of all that fucking work starting to pay off.
It's a culmination of all that, and then there's, I love the Avengers. Age of Ultron was, it was okay, right? It wasn't my favorite. There were some things I kind of liked in it, but when you get into here and you see all these characters here, and you see like post-Civil War, like the way that everyone's kind of disbanded and kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But some of my favorite scenes on there, just as pop culture nerds ourselves, is like Star-Lord and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Talking together and comparing movies, right? And like, that's a scene that's like forever burned in my mind. And like, one of my favorite entire, like, just casual conversation scenes in the entire MCU. Just because I love that character dynamic they have, right? And I love that Star-Lord and Spider-Man are always doing the pop culture references. There's so many of them, right? And they, they're like, oh, let's do the aliens thing, right? Where they suck the guy out of the ship. Yeah. So it's pretty awesome to see some of those things.
Yep. Tony Stark makes a pop culture reference in that one too. He calls the other guy fucking Squidward and shit. He likes to do that.
Yeah, and so to me, like, that was just the culmination of, like, you get so many characters because the MCU is just so big at that point, and then you start seeing these characters come together, and then the way they weave all those storylines through, and like, you have all these characters in there, but they're not all overlapping at the same time yet. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, time for my number 1. Any guesses?
On your number 1? No.
Captain America. Civil War.
Civil War, okay.
This was hard. I had to debate it, honestly, between my number 1 spot was going to go to Civil War, Winter Soldier, or Infinity War. Because Winter Soldier is on a whole... after post-Avengers, that movie was on a whole new fucking level. That movie beat the shit out of the first Captain America, and I really liked the first Captain America. I would say that is probably, at least of the main 5 Avengers in the first, the early stuff, that's my favorite person in there, in that series of movies. The story arcs and everything. In Civil War, it basically just feels like another Avengers movie anyway. Other than, you are still focusing on Steve Rogers and subplots and stuff. Like, how Peggy dies and he has to go and deal with that. And the beginning of the movie opens up with Captain America still. Stuff like that, It's still Captain America focused. But then you get Black Panther and Spider-Man introduced. And you get to see all the rest of these characters. It's kind of where a lot of this real development happens, because you can see the relationship between Wanda and Vision. You get to see Ant-Man start interacting with this world for the first time, and fucking Giant Man for the first time. Civil War is just the shit for me. I love it.
I enjoy that one quite a bit. It's pretty fun, but it's not my number 1. So
yeah,
I'll tell you what my number 1 is. It's Guardians of the Galaxy.
I expected that.
So this one was a slow burn for me, to be honest with you. I didn't see this one in theaters. I didn't know much about the Guardians of the Galaxy. I got it for Christmas on Blu-ray. After it had been out that year.
Yeah.
Finally sat down and watched it and liked it. Didn't really love it then. It was kind of one of those that it grew on me, right? I was like, I really didn't quite get it, right? But I didn't know enough about. So then when I started like reading and doing some research and kind of seeing how that fit into the bigger scheme of things with the MCU, and going back and watching it again and like just seeing like how amazingly well done that was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and to me, that's one of the things I love the most about a theater. Is like when I'm in a theater, I'm fully 100% engaged in the movie, right?
For sure.
No distractions. And so for me, watching that movie for the first time, I was at home. I had my phone probably with me, so I wasn't like 100% in the zone on it, which I should have been. That would have helped.
Yeah.
But going back now, I can watch that movie anytime. Like the way you see these ragtag group of characters come together that like make no sense. Like you have a talking raccoon in it. Basically a tree that morphs and grows and does whatever the hell it wants. Yeah. And to see those, like, it's pretty amazing.
Guardians was very close. That would be my number 6. If we extended this to top 6, Guardians would have been it for me. Guardians I love also. So that's a good pick. I really like Rocket Raccoon and his kind of existential crisis that he's always having, you know. But he's very much the archetype for a person who has depression and issues like that because he hides it, and he's hilarious, and he always has a good time. But then you see that time he gets drunk, and he's like, his feelings fucking really get hurt, and that was one emotional fucking creature. And he's obviously been through some shit.
Definitely, I can. Yeah, he's like your spirit animal, right? Because he's like, I didn't ask to be made.
Yeah.
You know? And then, for me, it was hard choosing between Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 2, I really like. The replay values is good. Like, Kurt Russell's amazing in that, but that first one just shows them, like, coming together and learning to work together. And that really just stands out in my mind every time. So.
Nice.
Top 5 right there for you. Why don't you jump on our Facebook and tell us what your top 5 are.
Yeah, let us know. Give us a top 5 MCU films. That being said, let's move along.
What do you mean you haven't seen this film supreme made up of a dream team? This movie's pretty great. You're fucking late. Let's accelerate and get it on your plate.
And you don't want us exposing ourselves. And you don't want us exposing ourselves. Exposing ourselves.
Alright, so film exposure is a new segment. It's one we've had the idea for since the beginning. We're finally getting around to doing it. We're going to be talking about the film Strange Brew. The concept behind this segment is we talk about a movie that either one of us or both of us had not seen until either today or, this week for the purpose of this podcast. So, Strange Brew is a movie that I only even saw a year or two ago and lost my shit when I watched it for the first time. I was like, why the fuck haven't I been watching this my whole life? Who's depriving me of this? Who do I have to fight right now? So, I wanted Justin to see it because fucking Rick Moranis, man, in this movie is so hilarious. I just can't stand it. I love it. So let's get into this talk about Strange Brew. What were your feelings before you watched it and then going into it?
So before I'd watch it, I'd kind of seen some of their skits and stuff before, so it's pretty funny. Basically, like two brothers that live at home with their parents, and they drink a lot of beer and kind of have their own little show, and just kind of being a bunch of funny guys, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciated that, but I didn't, I'd never seen the movie, so I was like, okay, kind of get in to see what this is about. And I didn't do any research on it. I just bought it on digital, just so I could watch it for the purpose of this podcast. And didn't do any research, right? I didn't want to go in there with any preconceived ideas besides the fact of what I'd seen limited before, right? Because we've all seen sketch comedy shows go from a small sketch to a full-length movie, right?
For sure.
Plenty of SNL examples. Sometimes they translate well, sometimes they don't, right?
Yep.
So I think all you had said was kind of think of it as a precursor to the Wayne's World stuff.
Yeah, think of it as Canadian Wayne's World.
That was it. Yeah, that's about all I needed for it. So I love how tongue-in-cheek it was at the beginning, right? So you start off the movie, and they're fucking with the lion. Like, you see the lion, and you hear the lion burp, and then you realize that's those guys behind the lion.
Yeah, and he's like...
They're, talking about cranking its tail, and I'm like, man, that's so timely, because all this Tiger King, lion, giant cat bullshit, just keeps coming up in everything we're doing. And I'm like, oh, man, this is all just, signs that the universe is totally aligned for big cats to take over the earth.
Yeah.
And definitely really enjoyed that. And then they get very movie within movie, like crazy vibes started off with. You're like, what the fuck? Is this going to be so over the top the entire time? And then it kind of tones itself down, which is funny. And then, they kind of go with like those Canadian tropes of like, oh, the Canadian police are so nice. And like, they're going the wrong way, even though people are looking for them to get a refund from the movie that everyone ran out of.
Which I have to briefly mention.
Like, oh, just turn
that movie.
Turn around and go the other way.
I also lost my shit during that movie. the short movie where he's like, 2051, 4 years after World War IV, eh? And then he's like, I can land on the Forbidden Zone, He was like, it's like Russia blew up the US, eh? And like the US blew up Russia, eh?
See, that's what you took out of there, but what I took out of that beginning spot, he's like, hey, basically I just spend my time looking for beer, eh?
Yeah. And I love when he comes across Dave, and he's like, in his thing, and he's like, are you friendly? And he's like, no way, eh?
Yeah, and you see their van in there, and the costumes are so terrible. Yeah, I liked how tongue-in-cheek it was.
Yeah,
there.
it was. That part always makes me fucking laugh and be like, man, I wish I could almost just watch this because it's hilarious. He was like, I was kind of like a one-man force, like, Charlton Heston, Omega Man. Do you see it? Describing another movie in his movie monologue and shit. But the theme song for this fucking movie I loved. After you were talking about the refunds and they kind of go into the chaos and the like opening credits sequence, and the theme song is just dope as hell. I love it. Classic 80s cheese.
Yeah, and they do that classic 80s move where you're like, okay, we're going to start the movie and then we'll get into the credits, right? So many movies now just start with like credits and like computer animated stuff or, kind of like that whole thing, and then you go back to these classics and you see like, okay, we're going to start off with like a little sketch.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do that. It's almost like a Saturday Night Live type cold opening for a show, right? Okay, here's the opening. Then we get into the credits or, live from New York, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then you get up and going with it and you start kind of setting pace for the movie. And I love how they go to their house and their parents are in the other room. You don't really see much of them. Like you just hear their dad yelling the whole time.
Yeah.
And they give the dog beer immediately.
Yes, I love the dog beer scene.
And then they chug the beer, and then their dad asks for a beer and says like, "Leave me a beer." And so then they got to take the beer back from the dog. The dog gets pissed, and they give him a jelly donut.
There's jelly donut coming.
Yeah, they're like, "Hey, here's a jelly donut coming, man."
Which
and it's
I'm immediately
awesome.
reminded of. Nice pooch. Maybe I got a milk bone.
You really feel some of the Louis Tully vibes of just like that kind of bumbling idiot, right? That he does so well.
Oh yeah, that's I think why I might have loved it so much, because it just kind of feels like you're getting those chops from Rick that you want.
And the dog's name is Hosehead. Like that's what's written on the damn dog bowl with looks like a permanent marker or a Sharpie or something.
Yeah, here's a funny thing. Later in the movie, do you remember when they come home and they open the door and their parents are fucking?
Is that when they come back with the beer after the first day on the brewery?
It's not that time. It's a different time when they come home. It's when they stop there, I think, when they're being followed. But they walk in there, they open the door, and it's their dad laying on top of their mom. And he just says, "Take off!" But what's funny is I was like, wait a second. And I paused it. And the mom and dad is Dave Thomas and Rick Moranis in makeup. Rick Moranis is the wife.
That's fucking hilarious. So, like, they cameo as themselves, like, as other characters in there. That's funny.
They play their parents, and it's funny because, Rick Moranis is obviously much shorter than Dave Thomas, so he's, like, playing that. It's fucking awesome.
So I like how, like, this movie's all about beer and donuts, and, like, if you haven't tried those two, they surprisingly pair well.
Right. You always need a good beer movie.
Exactly. Like, this is not quite up there with Beer Fest, but it's definitely got those vibes. And I love how they're trying to get information from the secretary at the brewery when they first get in there. And they bribe her with a donut that looks disgusting.
It's fucking hilarious.
Like, it's been in his pocket and it looks gross because it's a frosted, like, chocolate donut. Yeah. And then they want more information, so obviously Bob pulls a jelly donut out of his pocket too. Like, like the reoccurring themes of beer and donuts and all that kind of funny stuff just keeps coming back.
Yeah, I read about how they kind of came up with these characters was because they were on SCTV, which is Canadian, SNL pretty much. Easiest way to describe it. Mm-hmm. So they started airing it on CBS in the US. And they wanted like a 5-minute segment that was devoted to like Canada, you know, because they're like, this is a Canadian show, we want it to be Canadian. So basically Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas were just like, well, fuck you, it's made in Canada, it is Canadian in nature. So they were just like, we're gonna give you all the fucking Canada you want, we're gonna Canada this shit up. So they were just like beer and donuts and constantly, but people ate it up, so they were like, all right. But they were kind of just saying fuck you to people at first, which is why it's so funny.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciated that, right? Because for me, I love pastries and donuts are...
yeah.
Beautiful thing about donuts, right, is they can be breakfast, they can be lunch, they can be dinner, they can be a snack, they can be a dessert. Donuts. Feel like Homer Simpson, you know?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, one of the other things I really got a kick out of in this movie was when they get all dressed up in that hockey gear, and he makes a joke. He's makes the Darth Vader joke in there, and then Bob says, you know, he's yeah, man, he's seen Jedi about 17 times, eh?
So here's something funny about that. This movie came out before, or it was filmed before Return of the Jedi, but it came out after. They did not know the title of the movie because at the time it was called Revenge of the Jedi. So that's why they just call it Jedi.
They just simply say Jedi. Yeah, which makes sense though, because that's what
people call it still.
You know, that's what it's commonly referred to. Yeah, like people don't call it The Empire Strikes Back; they say Empire.
Yep.
I mean, A New Hope is A New Hope. You don't just call it Hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Jedi. It's Empire. Something dark side. Something complete.
Change my diaper. I made a Darth Dookie.
I need a Darth Vader.
Where's my fleshlight?
So one of the things that really cracked me up that was unexpected, right? I love when movies do silly shit that has like no real meaning on it, but like after the barrel scene, not the barrel scene, but the beer keg scene, and like you think everyone's drowning and everything, they're like intermission.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh man, definitely got some like, you know, I flashed back to watching Grindhouse and seeing the intermission in that movie, right? Which that's a story for another time because I love those movies.
Yeah. I really like.
But I did like the intermission piece.
Yeah,
there.
but before they're doing that and they're driving, you know, it's really funny because he's like, Rick Moranis is like, so hey, you ever notice how in movies when they're driving they don't pay attention to the road? And the other guy literally takes both hands off the wheels and turns to him and is just like, no, I never noticed that before. You know, and he starts talking to him before he eventually swerves and avoids hitting a truck. But it was just like one of those stupid moments. He's like, yeah, they're being towed.
Yeah, he explains it. He's like, yeah, usually in a movie, man, they're being towed.
And then,
yeah, so he's not paying any attention.
Yeah, like when they come back from the intermission and they're underwater, fucking drinking, or they're breathing from old beer bottles that have air in them and they're turned upside down and shit.
Yeah, that scene was cracking me up. And then when the cops come down there, or whoever the divers come down to rescue him, like he pulls out his ID and shows it to him. You're like, oh my god.
I was like, actually, that's pretty. This scene is must have been weird and risky to shoot for a comedy movie. You know, I was like actually really surprised. I was thinking about it. I was like, man, But
yeah, no, I thought it was pretty good. It's definitely one of those I need to watch a few more times to really get all the ins and out of. But you know, you kick yourself for not having seen this.
Yeah,
as many times. You know, I've read The Wild and Crazy Guys, and if you like any of these '80s comedies and stuff, man, that's a essential reading. So check that out. You know, they talk a lot about some of these characters and stuff, and seeing this, I'm like, okay, I'm glad I just went ahead and bought it to view it instead of renting it, because now I can just kind of see it whenever I want and kind of get that in there.
Yeah.
I mean, for people that the only second language I speak is film quotes, and that's on the resume when you look it up. You know, I need to have more of these quotes in there. I mean, doing the Canadian thing is pretty easy, because all you got to say is a.
Yeah.
And
take off.
We used to work with Canadian. Yeah, his name was Andrew. He's Canadian though, so you say he's a Canadian. What are you talking about? Or if you grow up watching anything from like Bobby's World, Bobby's mom like had that heavy Minnesota accent.
Oh, fucking Bobby's World! I remember that shit. I always watch that.
Yep. Little Howie Mandel action. Yep. So it'd always be like, oh, get yourself a toaster strudel. Don't you know there, Bobby? But I love saying toaster strudel like a Canadian, eh?
Yeah.
And it's a pastry. So, I mean, that explains why they came up with toaster strudels instead of, donuts.
Well.
So what's your favorite scene in that movie?
I would say... I mean, that's really hard. Honestly, like the first 15 to 20 minutes of that movie, there's nothing better for me. Not to say that it gets worse, but it's just like there's so much happening and changing that it's just joke after joke after joke. And it's so good and funny, and then it slowly starts to get into plot, but it's one of those movies that in the middle of the movie, if you're not paying attention too much, you could fall victim to looking at your phone a lot and shit. You know what I mean? But if you stick with it, it's worth it.
It's less jokes, and because it's carrying the story on there. But, there's a lot going on, too, which I also found it funny that Max von Sydow was the villain in there, right? And he's such a character actor, right? It's like hard to even like realize who it is because he's got an iconic voice and he's played so many iconic characters, but he does a good job in this movie just kind of blending in and not being like an over-the-top villain, but just kind of doing a good job of being a villain that kind of carries the movie along.
Yeah, it's kind of like the other guy that works with him is the Samantha Baker's dad from 16 Candles.
Yeah, and the only thing I guess I wish is that he would have been more over the top because he's so good when he's over the top.
All right, wait.
I think that would have balanced out well with...
Here's something.
Bob and Doug.
You know how over the top he is? That guy that we're talking about, the kind of fat, chubby guy who's with Max all the time.
Yep.
Do you know what other glorious sitcom he's in?
What's that?
Surprised you don't know. But maybe you just haven't watched a bunch of the later seasons recently. Or actually any of them, maybe. I think he's in the first or second. But you need to watch the legendary Alf. Because he plays Wizard Deaver, who is the mother-in-law's love interest / husband eventually.
Nice. Okay, yeah, I definitely need to get on some of those later seasons. When Alf Season 1 came out on DVD, I bought that immediately. I was working at Target at the time, and I remember the day like it was put on the shelf and I noticed it. I was like, holy shit, guess what I'm buying? And I went home and binge watched the whole season on DVD like that night.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't pick up some of the later ones, but, now that we're talking Alf more often, and Alf is...
You can pick up the whole box set now for
influences.
$20.
Oh, $20? I think that's a good investment. So.
Yeah. I obviously have all four, and as we talked about earlier, I now have the movie, which I think we're going to be talking about in the next couple weeks sometime. So look out for that if you're a big fan of Alf like I am. Otherwise, just prepare for some Melmacian...
Hey, Willie.
Hey, Willie. Take out your Willie. No, there's a... do yourselves a favor and look at the season 1 gag reel for Alf.
Oh, it's so inappropriate. Yeah, that's hilarious.
At one point, he grabs Kate's hands, or she's like touching him or something during an outtake, and he's like, "Don't touch me! Don't touch the star!" And then he's like, "If you're gonna touch me down here." And he grabs her hand and he forces it to where his crotch would be.
Yeah, there's some real inappropriate shit on that gag reel, which is pretty funny.
I love it.
It's funny in that first season anyway, when they're in there watching, or he's like sharing the toothbrush.
Oh yeah.
He's like, "That's my toothbrush, Alf."
Or like one time Alf walks into the kitchen and is just like, "I'm sorry, did you say I should or shouldn't get fur in the peanut butter?"
Yeah. Yeah, Alf's an amazing show. So speaking of which, like, I love that Bob Seger and the Silver Bullets old-time rock and roll song strictly because the fucking Alf intro, or the episode where he's on there and he's singing in the goddamn pickle. And, like, not really a Bob Seger and the Silver Bullets fan, but holy shit, that song, like, every time I hear it, just, like, reminds me of Alf.
Well, that's funny, because that's
perfect
a reference to Risky Business,
Absolutely. But as a kid, I didn't see Risky Business till later, so to me, like, it always still goes back to the Alf scene.
That's funny, because Melissa says that all the time. Like, if she hears that song, she's like, "It's the Alf song." And I'm like, "Fuck you, it's Risky Business, you dirty bitch. Don't you know anything?" She's like, well, it reminds me of Alf.
Yeah,
and I'm
but-
like, fuck you, it's risky business. And just give her shit for it. But
Well, that's because you're too fucking young to have watched Alf on TV.
that's
So,
not true.
Suck it. Oh.
You ever heard of a little thing called...
How old were you?
Syndication.
Oh, so you got to see Project Alf when it was new? See, I got to see this shit when it was airing, and it was all the latest and greatest and the hottest program on television.
But, yeah.
The other challenge for you, listeners out there as we wrap up, tell us your favorite episode of Alf. We'll watch it, and we'll do some YouTube reviews of your favorite episode of Alf. So tell us what your favorite is.
Yep. Remember all of our social media. Hit us up with your top 5 MCU films. Any other topics you want to talk about? Grandma's Boy, Strange Brew. If you want to hit us up, let us know what you think about those. We're on now, obviously, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All that good stuff. So if we're not on any listening sites that you like to use, just let us know. We'll try to get on there as well.
And on that,
We'll say good night and good luck.
Good night, and have a pleasant tomorrow.
These are my dinner guests, the Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers. These are my dinner guests, Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers. These are my dinner guests, the Frog Brothers.